But before we talk about Bobbitt and Menendez and the news of the week, let's start with a story that began more than 60 years ago and is still being talked about today. You'll see a remarkable film that's bound to change the way fans view the greatest legend in sports history, the called shot of Babe Ruth. Now, if you don't know much about baseball, or if the Babe was a little before your time, trust us, the film we'll broadcast tonight for the first time is the holy grail of the baseball world. Did the Babe call his shot? You decide.
There's the booing again, which means Babe Ruth is coming to bat again.
It's a legend that outlived the man who started it.
He did it! It's a home run in the center field bleachers, right where he pointed.
If you think you know what really happened, it's only because you're believing Hollywood's version of the truth. In real life, the scene was Wrigley Field, Chicago. It was October 1st, 1932, the third game of the World Series between the Chicago Cubs and Babe Ruth's New York Yankees. It was the fifth inning. Both Ruth and Lou Gehrig had already hit home runs for the Yankees, but the Cubs had come back and tied the score at 4 apiece. The Babe came to the plate. He took a couple of called strikes. According to legend, Babe Ruth had the arrogance, the nerve, to point at the center field fence and then on the next pitch, swing and hit a home run to that exact spot, the famous called shot of baseball. He was the greatest ball player of his day, perhaps of any day, and his home run record stood for decades. There's no question Ruth hit a home run in that game against the Cubs. In fact, he hit 2, and the second put the Yankees ahead to stay.
It wasn't just that he hit a home run, it was the longest home run ever seen in Wrigley Field at that time. And it was just stunning. The crowd just sort of sat back, and Ruth had done it.
But what exactly had he done? Had he called his shot? Even if you've never hit a baseball for a living, you know how difficult it is to even make contact with a ball going 90 or 95 miles per hour, let alone predict exactly where it's going to go.
One of the old ball players, Wade Hoyt, told me about Ruth. He said all the lies about Ruth are true. So maybe this lie is true too, I don't know.
Did you believe it?
Oh yes, absolutely. He had such a flair for doing the right thing at the right time.
Newsreels caught the early games of the 32 series, but the called shot has only been talked about, never documented. The only radio broadcast is a recreation. At the Baseball Hall of Fame in Cooperstown, New York, are 2 oil portraits, no photograph, and this audio-visual exhibit.
To this day, controversy and discussion rage about Babe's famous called shot home run.
It's 2-0 in the Yankees' favor as 50,000 fans get set for the third game of the World Series, and Governor Roosevelt starts the battle off.
What has been documented is the bad blood between the Yankees and the Cubs in 1932. The Cubs had fired their manager Joe McCarthy 2 years earlier. Now he was the Yankee manager and eager for revenge. And there was Mark Koenig, traded from the Yankees to the Cubs in mid-season. But the Cubs voted to give Koenig only a half share of the World Series money. That made Koenig's former teammates angry. Ruth liked to call the Cubs cheap. At the Chicago hotel where the Yankees stayed, an angry crowd gathered to boo the visiting team, and a woman spat on Ruth's wife. When Ruth came to the plate in the 5th, the Cubs fans in the stands were really giving him a hard time. Someone threw a lemon at him, and it landed on the field. The players in the Cubs dugout were just as merciless.
He was 38 or so, 37 or 38, pot-bellied. He was an old ball player. Hadn't played the last part of the season because he was sick. They weren't sure he could play in the series. He was like the old bull being baited by jackals, and he loved it.
Well, it was then, according to the legend, that Ruth pointed at the center field fence. Mary Clark was here that day. She was 22.
Babe Ruth came up to bat, and the fans were on him naturally. And so he just, well, how I thought was a very arrogant way, he just pointed out like that and gave us to understand that's where he was going to hit a home run. And he did.
Manos Torkum says she's wrong.
We could see we had an unobstructed view of whoever was batting, especially if they were batting left-handed.
Today, Torkum, now 85, owns a carpet business in Chicago. But on October 1st, 1932, he was at Wrigley Field. He still has his ticket stub and this snapshot he took at the game.
I feel that he was holding up his hand towards the pitcher, as if to say, wait a minute.
Joe Sewell played third base for the Yankees that day. Before he died, he told of what he saw.
With his bat in his left hand, he pointed to the fence with them two fingers, just like it's in the picture in the Cooperstown. And I got a mental picture of that ball going out of the ballpark.
Bill Jurgis was the Cubs shortstop. It's been 61 years since he watched Ruth hit that home run. But Jurgis remembers clearly what he saw and what he thought Ruth did.
It was unbelievable because I thought he had mentioned to the fence and he hit it. I thought, boy, if a fella can do that, that's marvelous, that's great. And he did it.
Wouldn't that be an incredibly arrogant thing for a ball player to do? Or is that the kind of thing Babe Ruth would have done?
Well, you want to put it that way, I guess so. I wouldn't do it.
But after talking to the Cubs catcher, Gabby Hartnett, Jurgis said it became clear Ruth wasn't pointing at the fence.
What Gabby Hartnett told me, that the Babe said, well, that's only 2 strikes. There was 2 strikes on the Babe. And the Babe motioned, that's only 2 strikes.
When he hit it, did you know it was out?
Oh, hell yes.
Charlie Root threw the pitch that Ruth hit over the fence. Before his death, Root spoke to Hall of Fame broadcaster Jack Brickhouse.
Charlie told me that Ruth didn't point to a flagpole. He didn't point to the center field bleachers or indicate that's where he was going to hit it. Charlie told me if he had done that, I would have knocked him right on his butt on the next pitch.
So even players and fans at the same game can't agree on what happened. And back in '32, neither could the sports writers. Most papers didn't mention the called shot, but 2 did. The New York Times mentioned gestures from Ruth, and the World Telegram wrote that Ruth pointed to center field and punched a screaming liner to a spot where no ball had ever been hit before. And what did Babe Ruth say about it? That depends on when you talk to him. After his home run, Ruth rounded the bases and then came into the Yankee dugout. According to at least one newspaper, a teammate then asked him, "Did you point at the stands?" "Hell no," the Babe supposedly replied. A guy would have to be crazy to do a fool thing like that in the big leagues. But within months, Ruth was telling a much more flattering story.
Well, I looked down at center field and I implored him. I said, I'm going to hit the next pitch ball right past the flagpole. Well, the good Lord must have been with me.
It was only a ball player's yarn. There were no photos to prove or disprove it. But Ruth said it happened. And for a lot of people, that was enough. Broadcaster and baseball expert Bob Costas.
If this game had been a World Series game in the 80s or 90s, whatever he did would have been shown on replay from a half dozen different angles. He would have been interviewed immediately after the game.
And there'd be no mystery.
Exactly. Here, it becomes part of legend, and it takes on dimensions that just wouldn't be possible today.
Now, some 60 years later, it turns out there was another camera at the game. It was in the stands behind home plate on the third base side. It was a spring-wound Kodak in the hands of a Chicago printer named Matt Candle. His great-grandson Kirk now owns that film. It's never been publicly shown.
This is the kind of camera your great-grandfather had?
That's the way it's described to me.
And this is where he was sitting?
As best as we could tell.
Almost no one outside the Candle family has seen what you're about to see. In 3 minutes of footage, Matt Candle's home movie picked up the pregame ceremonies, the bands, the crowds, Matt's daughter Gladys looking disappointed as her Cubs fell behind. We see Ruth's first home run with 2 men on base, and then some more game footage. Now, you're about to witness the most famous moment in baseball history. It happens quickly, but here's what the people at the game saw when Ruth came to the plate in the 5th. After a called strike 1, Ruth gestures once, then twice. After strike 2, he makes a different gesture with his finger, once, twice. Then the pitch comes in and Ruth swings, and it's gone.
I think Babe Ruth called the shot.
We slowed down the film and magnified it and showed it to eyewitnesses, to experts, and to some of the greatest players ever, including Mickey Mantle and Reggie Jackson. What does the film show? Is it authentic? And where has it been for 61 years? That part of the story when we continue. Now the second part of our story about Babe Ruth's greatest hit and the home movie that shows it. The film that unlocks baseball's greatest mystery belongs to Kirk Candle, who lives with his wife and children in Louisville, Kentucky.
Why has your family kept this private all these years? Didn't you realize how many arguments this might settle?
No. No one was really aware of the controversy that went on surrounding this film.
His great-grandfather shot the film, but didn't seem to realize what he had.
Saturday, Gladys and I went to see the World Series.
Matt Candle's journal mentions Ruth's home runs, but no gestures.
I can show you a movie of Babe Ruth slamming out one of his famous home runs.
Later generations of Candles weren't sports buffs, and until Kirk saw a newspaper story a few years ago, he wasn't aware that he owned the Zapruder film of baseball.
I guess what's so difficult to believe is that this film, with tremendous significance in sports history, has been just sitting around your house all these years.
It hasn't been seen through a projector very much. Over the years, the film has been in basements, it's been in attics, it's been moved from Chicago to Miami, to Atlanta.
It could easily have been lost.
Very easily.
Okay.
And not only is the film safe, it's authentic. We sent it to Optifex, a Chicago production company that specializes in visual effects. Their expert looked at the Candle film and concluded it's the real thing.
From the looks of the film and from the type of film that it is, I would definitely say that this is a piece of original film.
In that season, he had hit his 59th home run.
We went a step further, taking the film to experts at the Baseball Hall of Fame.
We were able to identify it as coming from the 1932 World Series by checking such things as the background and the footage, the other players that were involved, in addition to Ruth.
Does this look familiar?
And we showed it to the eyewitnesses. But before you hear their reactions, take a look at the layout of Wrigley Field that day. Babe Ruth stood at home plate. 60 feet 6 inches away was the pitcher, Charlie Root. Along the third base line and facing Ruth was the Cubs dugout. And you're seeing all this from the seat where Matt Candle focused his camera. Mary Clark was in the bleachers. She remembers the Babe pointing at the fence, and the film doesn't change her mind.
He was so sure he was going to hit a home run. See? See? I saw it.
But just as in court, the same images can produce different verdicts. Manus Torkham remembers Ruth pointing not at the fence, but at something else, and says the film proves him right.
See, you can see, he doesn't get his hand up like this. He's getting his hand out like this. Looked to me like he was pointing to the pitcher.
The Cubs shortstop, Billy Jurgis.
Is that you?
Yeah.
Right there?
That's me. Don't you recognize me?
Here's the first motion.
That's to the dugout. See, it wasn't like that. See, it was like that.
Then he takes a called strike, too.
Yeah.
And he makes another motion.
That's right. But his arm wasn't elevated like this.
Unfortunately, there is no sound on Candle's film, so what Babe Ruth said at the plate will remain hearsay. Julia Ruth Stevens says her father rarely talked about his work.
Do you think it's possible that as the years went by, he recognized that that was a pretty good story and started telling it about himself, even though it wasn't strictly true, but because it was kind of good for his image?
It could be. It's a possibility.
But after seeing the film, the Babe's daughter says it happened just as she always heard it.
He really did. He really did.
In those second 2 points where he has his arm cocked, is he pointing at the pitcher and saying, I got one more left, or is he pointing at the fence?
It certainly meant that he was going to do something the next pitch. Next one you send over here. Oh, yes, absolutely.
Okay. Who's up? Tony! Tony, give me a little go here!
We took the film to Mickey Mantle's Week of Dreams baseball camp in Fort Lauderdale, where we showed it to the Yankee slugger and to his coaches, including Bobby Mercer, Ron Guidry, Catfish Hunter, Moose Skowron, Enos Slaughter, and Johnny Blanchard.
I called my shot against the Cardinals in the '64 series one time. Elston was on the on-deck circle, and when I went by him, I said, Elston, you can go on back in. I'm going to hit a home run.
And you called that big
I called that one, yeah.
How many more did you call?
Well, I called him about 500 times. That was the only one I ever... Most of my called homers were strikeouts.
But when these former big leaguers saw the film, it was down to business.
1, 2.
Now he's pointing there.
Dugout. He's talking to dugout.
He's talking to the dugout.
Yeah.
See, they were eating him up. They were riding him.
Now watch right here. After the catcher throws the ball back, he points again. See?
Yeah.
You can just barely see his hand.
And he said he still had one.
Yeah.
He was talking, you know, he was talking to the dugout, so I'm gonna give you 2 strikes and I'm gonna hit it.
Yeah.
What?
See right there in front of the catcher then, he went like that. I think that's when he called it. And this is it. That looks like a home run swing to me. That's gone.
Boom. He got it all.
Wow.
Well, I think he called it.
I'm not going to doubt that
I'm not gonna doubt it. I mean, as a hit,
Whatever
I
he
think
did,
called
that's
it.
fine with me.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. He built the house we lived in, didn't he, guys?
That's right, sure.
And we showed it to another slugger who, like the Babe, hit from the left side of the plate and who was famous both for his home runs and for his arrogance.
It had to be a Reggie Jackson or a Babe Ruth type, a Muhammad Ali type. I really can't think of another athlete that was like that. You see right here, when you see him here, he looks like a hitter here. There's good weight transfer. He's taking that pitch. The back leg is cocked.
Hall of Famer Reggie Jackson viewed the candle footage in his office at the Upper Deck Card Company in San Diego.
I've stood at the plate when I was in my prime. I was mean, I was vocal, and I would do what he's doing now. I'd tell a guy, you're full of throw the ball, you or let's go. I got one more left. It don't make any difference. I mean, I would say those kind of things to a guy, and it looks like that kind of jawing is going on. There is no extended arm. There is no point. There is no glare in center field, as many people said he pointed to a glare or something bothering his vision. No, there is. This is much more realistic when you see it. Like there, he's jawing there. Now when he comes back the second time, he'll say, yeah, I got 1, 2. But I don't see a called shot here. I don't see a called shot.
And other experts agree.
Could he be saying to the Cubs players, shut up, get back in the dugout?
Or it could be just a motion of disdain. It seems to me that there's taunting going on here, but there's no specific declaration, I'm going to hit the ball out of the park.
Freeze it.
As I look at this, the thing that strikes me is where his arm and hand are and the angle, which doesn't suggest that he's pointing out over the head of the pitcher and out toward the center field bleachers. I'd like to believe it. I wish it were possible to interpret it that way, but if you were pointing out in that direction, maybe you wouldn't go the William Bendix route in the Babe Ruth story, where Bendix went, you know, it was absurd. But certainly your hand would have to be up over shoulder level.
Now, you don't place a lot of importance on these next 2 points after the called strike. His arm's cocked. He's doing something.
Well, it's possible, but I don't think there's any way you could say that that gesture is an indication I'm going to hit the next pitch in the center field seats.
It's hard to look at the film and come to any other conclusion. But whatever he was pointing at and whatever he said, what Babe Ruth did in the batter's box that day is a lot more than any major leaguer would do today. In the 1990s, ball players don't call their shots, they call their agents. But on that day in '32, the Babe heard the taunts, he responded to them, and he hit the next one out.
It was an incredible moment. And that's what I think the argument about whether he actually pointed to center field or not, I don't think it matters a damn. I really don't. There's no question that Ruth said he was going to hit a home run, and he did hit a home run. The most dramatic moment in World Series history, I think.
Well, is this the end of a legend?
I hope not. I really hope not.
You hope this story stays alive?
Yes.
Because it's good for baseball?
Sure, it's good for baseball.
Good for the Babe?
Yeah, sure. God bless his soul.
Okay, you've seen the film, you've seen the reactions. What do you think?
It's one of my favorite sports myths, but I have to say, having seen the film, I think he was talking trash to the dugout.
Yeah, well, I'm kind of with Bob Costas on this one. I'd like to believe it, but I don't see it.